stories that get blown up and that get covered, but what is the harm? What is the harm of it?
Yeah, so unlike with other stories that maybe are, over underrepresented, this actually has real life implications for women of color. Why? This makes them less safe because perpetrators, predators know that if you want to get away with murder, you seek the victim that no one is going to.
I can't. Get out.
Hello, hello, hello. I'm Madison, and welcome back to another installment of True Crime in Society. I'm so excited to be here with this story, and this is one of those stories that has kind of been pushed to the wayside. It's gotten some attention on some podcasts, and some YouTubers have done it, but this is one of those really intense true crime stories. And it's crazy. We're going to get into that later. First and foremost, I just want to say, if you are returning, thanks for returning. Please like the video and comment down below and share it with whoever you think will love it. If you are just here for the first time and you like the content, subscribe, press that bell notification, and comment down below your thoughts on the Cleveland Strangler story. Now, before we get into this story, I want to shout out two YouTubers that I think are relevant, and their videos that I think are relevant to this particular case and video that I'm trying to construct. The first being my good girly How to Spot a Killer. She is a phenomenal YouTuber, Black true crime YouTuber who does amazing, amazing content. And she actually did this story a while back before we knew each other. I actually found her YouTube channel because she was doing this story, which is so crazy because I had already made a script for this story and knew that this would at some point be in rotation in terms of the true crime stories that I was going to say on my channel. So we instantly connected on that fact, and she's been a wonderful friend to have. She's so sweet and caring, but she did an amazing Cleveland Strangler story as well, so I'm going to link that down below. She also comes at it from a different angle. She comes at it from the angle of spotting the signs of a murderer or a serial killer, early childhood trauma, things like that, abuse and things like that. So I really think that a lot of context that you may need for the Cleveland Strangler story, she has it in her video. I'm going to be talking more about the case itself, and I'm going to be talking more about how this basically went on for years and nobody really paid attention to it because of the victims he chose. The second person I want to shout out is Intellectual Media. She is one of my most inspiring YouTuber people that I watch religiously. She does amazing content. She's also a streamer. She's absolutely gorgeous. She's so brilliant, and her editing skills are amazing. And I think why I wanted to shout out her is because she did a video on femicide, particularly focusing on femicide in the Black community. And I think that parts of that video, which I'll also link down below because it's mind-blowing, are so important to the context of this case and the context as to why these women weren't looked for and things of that nature. So I'll put both of those links in the description. They're both amazing people, both amazing videos. But today we are going to be discussing, the case of the Cleveland Strangler. I kind of want to touch on the fact that the Cleveland Strangler is something that happened in 2009. So this isn't something that was old. This wasn't the 1970s where serial killers were just roaming about and terrorizing the entire country. This was something that happened in 2009. I was in middle school in 2009. I was in the 8th grade in 2009. So this is something that happened fairly recently. And this happened in Cleveland, obviously Cleveland, Ohio, but in a poor, poverty-stricken, drug filled community, Black community in the area. And I think that's so important because when we get into the specifics of how the police handled this case, the particular people who were victims in this case, different points where the police could have intervened in this case and didn't, I think the where they were and where they lived and where this took place is incredibly important, and who the victims were and the perpetrators were is extremely, extremely important. Now, this case is it's a disturbing one. It's sad, it's disturbing, it has all of the things. Bodies hidden in houses, it has several bodies found on one plot of land. It has everything like that. So I'm just going to say right now, trigger warning for any of those things, because this is a pretty graphic story and pretty intense. Yeah, it's disturbing. Without further ado, we're going to get into the story of the Cleveland Strangler. Ciao. Jesus. In the late afternoon of October 29, 2009, the police are preparing to follow up on a warrant. A woman named LaTondra Billups had come to them and made a police report alleging that she was extremely sexually assaulted and basically nearly killed. The situation goes as follows. She was at a friend's house partying, and one minute everything was cool. The next minute he snapped and beat her, sexually assaulted her, and then strangled her with an extension cord. She was passed out for hours on the ground, and then to her surprise and the surprise of her near killer, attempted murderer, she woke up and was able to escape the house.
What's going on? Y'all are going to jail.
The craziest part was LaTondra knew this man. He was a local guy named Anthony Sowell who lived in the neighborhood and had lived in the neighborhood for years, and they were friends. And she had been invited over to his house to party and partake in party favors, if you know what I mean, together with him. And she took him up on the offer because she knew him. And one thing led to another, and she ended up beaten within an inch of her life and strangled and having to find her way out of this house of horrors, essentially. LaTondra had known Anthony throughout the community as being a very generous man, a very kind man. He would go out of his way to help his neighbors. He, in fact, even dated one of her really good friends at a point. So she was in no way thinking this was necessarily a random act of violence, because she and him were pretty familiar. Though she had never been to his house before on a social occasion, she felt extremely comfortable with who he was, with his reputation in the community, and, she was wrong. The crazy part was that there was a rumbling of rumors surrounding who Anthony was and how he was towards women in the community. And oftentimes those rumors were kind of quelled out because he was such a good neighbor and such a kind person and such a fixture in the community, would honestly go out of his way to help people and all of that kind of thing, that people just were like, okay, those are just rumors. That doesn't add up to who I experience him to be in my day-to-day life. So LaTondra had heard those things and brushed them aside, as most everyone else did, because he seemed like a really, really genuinely nice person in general. So when this happened, it was even more shocking because there was already some talk about him being violent towards women. Now, to be frank, Anthony did not necessarily deserve the benefit of the doubt from his community, because he had been just released from a 15-year sentence of being in prison. He was in prison for sexually assaulting a young girl, and he was a tier 3 sex offender, which is one of the most severe sex offenders that you can be. So he wasn't necessarily the nicest person. In fact, his track record proved quite the opposite, but people still thought of him as a kind guy because of the favors that he would do to others in the community. And so even though the hard evidence pointed towards a violent past, a sexually deviant past, 15 years in prison for sexual assault is a very long time, but he was able to counteract that by acting and presenting as a shining, holy, nice, good person in his community. So, again, pay attention to the red flags, folks, because there are a lot in this story, but it's important to understand that oftentimes people who are violent or predatory in some kind of way, both sexually and just physically, have a mask, right? This story, and you'll see why, reminds me a lot of John Wayne Gacy's story because of the fact that he was a fixture in the community. He was a clown, for God's sakes. He was at children's birthday parties and everything. Like, people really liked this guy. But he was hiding the fact that he was doing some of the most gruesome murders ever and hiding these bodies around his home. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's important to pay attention that even though you don't necessarily experience or you hear negative things about a person and you don't want to believe them right away, because obviously people do make rumors, unfortunately. But it's important to put a pin in certain things and understand that people who have particular types of rumors attached to their name, like being violent towards women, being dangerous, having gone to prison for sexual assault, it's important to understand that whatever persona they're presenting you with is probably to try and counteract what they already know about themselves, right? And this is exactly what he did, and he did it well. Now, because he was a tier 3 sex offender, which again is a most egregious, most intense and dangerous version of being a sex offender, he was required by the state, since he was out of prison, to check in with law enforcement every 90 days, as well as law enforcement would come by his home and do random checks at his house unannounced to make sure that everything was on the up and up. So he had a good rapport with the police. Everyone thought him to be generally harmless. So it's even more confusing that on September 22nd, 2009, during the day, the police had dropped by to his house, checked him off. Everything looked good. It was one of the surprise drop-bys. He passed it with flying colors. On the night of September 22nd, 2009 is when LaTundra was actually attacked. Now, you know, it's kind of one of those things because, like I said in the beginning, October 29th is when the police were preparing to go look up and follow up on this warrant that they had for Anthony's arrest because of LaTundra's story. But as I just stated, LaTundra's situation, the altercation actually happened a month earlier on September 22nd, 2009. Why did it take so long for the police to act? Well, there are several reasons. Let's get into them. As I said in the Evelyn Hernandez story, and I will keep saying it again, you know, when it comes to these cases, things are really time sensitive, especially because, as we'll find out, there are other victims and there are other survivors of Anthony Sowell who have gone to the police or didn't go to the police, but rumors were swirling around him, and it was known that he was semi-dangerous towards women. LaTundra was a drug addict and a prostitute. And in 2009, she was very, very deep into her addiction. So in this case, the police were not really able to pin her down in order to follow up with her about this whole Anthony Sowell situation and trying to get her piece into how to, you know, go about everything in terms of catching him. My issue with that is, okay, convenient excuse. Yes, she's a drug addict. Yes, she's hard to find. Yes, yes, yes. But they had all of the pieces to the puzzle. They had already had a warrant for him. They had already known and taken LaTundra's story down. In fact, after what happened on September 22nd happened, she went straight to the hospital, had a rape kit done, talked to the police in her hospital bed, and was attended to, and it was on the record. She did her first police statement that night, straight after she escaped from his house. So to me, it's like, okay, you may not have known that she was a drug addict and during this time period, but you had all you needed to be able to follow up on the case, follow up on Anthony, all of that stuff. You had the rape kit. You just needed some DNA from him to see if it matched. You had her story. You had the fact that she went straight to the hospital from his house. You had his address. You had all of this information already. So, of course, they needed to follow up with her before they went through with the warrant. But to me, they had all the information they needed, especially since this was a violent crime. She was unconscious for hours. She was brutally beaten and raped and strangled. No time should be wasted on, okay, let me call her today and see if she picks up. She gave you everything you needed to follow up on what she said you needed to follow up on. So to kind of blame her, which they did with a lot of these women, blame them for being drug addicts or prostitutes, or they couldn't get a hold of them a second time, when in most cases they had given them all the information they needed to follow up and go to his house and check to see if she was correct, is frustrating. And we'll get more into that in the story, but this is only the start of the story. But we'll get more into how this kind of excuse of these women being either sex workers or prostitutes or drug addicts comes up as kind of a shield for the police to be able to use, to be able to kind of justify why all of these murders happened right under their noses for so long. Let's continue. If you let Latundra tell the story, she went to the hospital to get the rape kit. She talked to the police while at the hospital, and she expected to get a call. She never got a call back from them until October. So fully weeks later, she gets a call from them in October to follow up. This is when they finally are able to connect with her a second time, but the police let them tell their version. It's because she was a drug addict and unreliable, so they couldn't reach her until October. So, two things that, two versions of the story. I believe victims, period. Like I said, it wasn't until October that she finally got the call back, and it wasn't until October 27th that she was able to make an official police statement, even though she had talked to the Cleveland Police Department when she was in the hospital. So, again, it seems kind of like there's a little bit of a breakdown of what's supposed to happen with the police department and protocol, but suffice it to say, October 27th, they took her official statement down, even though she had told her her statement weeks before. And it was October 29th when they prepared to follow up on said warrant for Anthony Sowell. All right. The goal to follow up with this official warrant was to find evidence in his house to connect Latundra to being in his house at the scene of the crime. So they were looking for Latundra's pink sweater and the extension cord that he had wrapped around her neck. The Sowell house was kind of interesting. It was a house owned by Anthony's stepmother, who was older, elderly, and had health issues, chronic health issues. But Anthony's stepmother lived in the bottom part, the first story of the house, and Anthony lived in the top 2 stories of the house. So he had his own space. This is important because I know it's kind of like, okay, he lived with his stepmom, so you would think that she would notice certain things. Well, he lived primarily on the top 2 stories, out of the way of his stepmom. There was a kitchen up there. There are different things up there that kind of made it so he didn't cross paths with her very often. So, like I said, the police's goal was to look and through the house, find the particular evidence that proves that Latundra was at this house with Anthony, and he attempted to kill her. So the cops are outside of the house, and they're deciding who's going to take the top floors and who's going to stay in the main floor. They separate and begin to approach going into the house. The first thing they notice about the house was a complete wreck. There were bags of dirty clothes, food rotting all over the place, just plain old trash bags all over the place. One of the cops said that even though there were several bathrooms available on the property, right, there were buckets full of human waste all around the main floor, all around the house. So immediately, we're getting to a sketchy start. It smells terrible in the house, and it's not just because of the human waste that's in the buckets. Something else is there. There's a lingering stench within the house, deep within the house, that they're all kind of reacting to. So they separate and they start their work. The people from the top are looking throughout the top 2 floors, and the people on the main floor are looking throughout the main floor and the basement. So the upstairs crew is looking upstairs, and the smell is just so intense. It's just this intense smell that they can't get away from. And in fact, as they move up to the last floor, it's getting stronger. They're able to clear all the rooms on the top 2 floors, except for one little sitting room on the top floor. So the police call out, ask if anyone's there, check the door, it's locked. So they break down the door, and the stench just wafts directly across them. They remember it. The cops that were interviewed remember it so clearly. The stench just wafted over them. And that was clearly the source of where the stench of the entire house, that wasn't just the fecal matter in the buckets, was coming from. And what they found in that room would start a few days of pure horror, pretty much. So after they break down the door, they look in with a flashlight because it's pitch black in the room. They see a couple of chairs, an end table, a TV, and 2 shapes on the ground. So the police scream out. They yell to identify themselves. They identify themselves as the cops. But then upon further viewing, they see that these were actually 2 dead bodies. And both of them were in very advanced stages of decomposition. So it was hard to make some sort of ID based on the bodies as they were. But from the jewelry and the clothing, they were able to tell that these were both 2 black women. This is important to note, but these bodies were wrapped up pretty much in black trash bags. So, they opened up the trash bags and found these bodies in very intense stages of decomposition. Now, as this is happening, they back out of the room as to not fumble with any potential evidence. They get a radio call from the people working the basement and the main floor of the house. And what that group finds is behind the stairs in the basement, they find fresh dirt that had just been messed with. And they see a black plastic bag poking out of the hole. So basically at that point, there's 2 confirmed bodies in the house. They basically say this is now a crime scene. They all get out of the house and call the matters that be in order to organize a proper search of the property with as many people as they can and not to tamper with any evidence. So they all back out of the house and call who needs to be called, because clearly something is amiss here. So as they're outside, they call homicide, and the cops are realizing that even though they went trying to find a simple pink sweater and an extension cord for an attempted murder case, this case has just blown wide open, and it's way bigger than they could have thought it would be. So, like I said, they call homicide. Homicide comes. They set up a crime scene. They put up the crime scene tape, and they start clearing the house floor by floor with the homicide detectives to gather evidence to make sure, they know, how to move forward from the situation. Now, as all this commotion starts happening, crowds of the neighborhood and people in the neighborhood start to form outside of the house, and they're all outside watching as these 2 bodies are pulled from the house. So everyone's starting to chatter, everyone's starting to question, but what most people start assuming is one of those bodies in the body bags has to be Anthony Sowell, because he had a history with drugs. He was a drug addict, so they just assumed he had died in the house. Now, here's where things get crazy. So the first lead of the case comes from a woman in the crowd named Debbie. And she's obviously watching as everyone else is watching these two bodies come out of the house and talking to everyone. And everyone's basically saying one of those bodies has to be Anthony because of his drug habit. So her being a good person and thinking she's being a good neighbor, she gets in her car and travels down a few blocks to where Anthony Sowell's sister lives in order to go and tell her that, commotion's happening at your house, at your brother's house where your brother's staying. 2 bodies were pulled. We think one of them is his, just to let her know what's going on with her brother. She pulls up to the house, knocks on the door. The door opens, and to her surprise, she sees Anthony Sowell sitting down on the couch playing video games with his nephew as this is going on, as they're pulling 2 bodies from this house. So she's shocked. But she's kind of like, okay, maybe this is a misunderstanding. I don't know what's really going on. But she basically convinces him to come back with her to the house to talk to the cops to make sure that, things get cleared up. Because clearly he can't be a murderer. Clearly he's a good person. So that's what happens. Debbie's able to convince him to get in the car to clear things up with the cops. So as they're driving back to his house, he's sitting there and he says, "It's all gonna come out now." So Debbie's kind of like, huh? Like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? What's gonna come out? And he just turns to her and is like, she made me do it. She made me do it. So, of course, Debbie's horrified because now she's in a car with someone that's basically walking around admitting that he killed some people. There are 2 bodies found in that house. Everyone thought one of them was his. It was not. He was playing video games at his sister's house. So there's 2 bodies in that house. Who knows who they are at this point? And he's over here in the car talking about it's all going to come out now. She made me do it. So she's over here piecing together in real time that this man has killed some people as they're pulling up to his house with the cops looking in his shit. She had no idea she was getting involved in this. He sees the commotion and says, "I don't want to go outside. Take me back to my sister's house." She's realizing she's in the car with a murderer, so that's what she does. She turns around, takes him back, drops him off to his sister's house, and basically she is quoted by police as to saying she was completely terrified. Her legs were shaking so violently she had to pull over. She could not drive home because she was so mortified. And when she got back, she immediately told the police. She told her family and friends what happened and some neighbors, and they made her go tell police what had happened just then.
Y'all are going to jail.
So like I said, Debbie gets home. She tells her family and friends what happened. They go to the cops, and she basically is like, I drove him. He's in the house, his sister's house right now. I dropped him off at his sister's. She tells them where it's at. They go. Minutes after she talks to them, he's already gone. So now his sister is kind of asking questions about what's going on, but is able to provide a description about what Anthony looks like, so the police can start running around. This is shaping up to basically become a manhunt right now. So they look for him, and can't really find him, even though you wouldn't think he'd be able to get that far, but obviously he was evading police, so he was probably hiding somewhere. So the police come back to his house and get the media to come in order to have a press conference and basically let everyone know that there's a killer on the loose. His name is Anthony Sowell. We found 2 bodies in his house. We originally came to the house to follow up on a warrant about a sexual assault and attempted murder, and came back with having found 2 confirmed bodies at this point. So they offered $2,000 for anyone that could tip them off with anything that could lead him to going to jail. And they basically were just like, yeah, this is a situation. Keep your eyes peeled. This is his description. And answered questions from the press. As this press conference is going on, the homicide detectives and homicide techs are all in the house, going room by room, inch by inch, trying to find any evidence. So they started with the basement. And like I said before, the basement is where they realized that under the stairs there was like a dirt patch, and they saw like a little black plastic bag, trash bag poking out, right? So basically, the basement is just like the rest of the house, a complete mess, buckets of human waste everywhere, trash everywhere, broken furniture, broken appliances, women's clothes, which is starting to like ring strange, and just trash and, generally disgusting. But the floor of the basement was concrete, except for this area underneath the staircase to the basement. It looked like it had been recently dug up. And so in homicide detective speak, it's kind of like, okay, this ground has been disturbed. There's fresh dirt here. Clearly, he has recently dug this concrete up to put something here, in homicide person speak. But when you think about it as a homicide detective, you're turning your gears and you're like, okay, but digging up a floor, made of concrete just to bury something underneath it and not even put concrete over it seems like such a hard feat. So they were starting to be like, okay, how many bodies are actually in this house for him to be digging up concrete to hide a body? How many bodies are honestly in this house at this point? So the homicide detectives dig in that little area where the fresh dirt patches and the piece of the plastic bag was poking out. And before long, they discover another body wrapped in black trash bags, partially decomposed. Another black woman. She had a belt, a green belt around her neck, and shoelaces binding her arms together. And she was in a pretty advanced state of decomposition, but they could tell she was a black female. And they start to kind of sit with the weight that this is going to be a long, shocking process of uncovering bodies all throughout this house. Now, we're going to pause here because what you might be thinking is, okay, this is the third body that we found in this house that's in an advanced state of decomposition. Obviously, there's an odor when bodies decompose, especially if they're not preserved. So this odor that they kept talking about, this intense stench that wasn't just the human waste or the trash in the house, it was a very distinctive stench. You may be asking, like, okay, how come nobody called about that smell? Because clearly they could smell it. And the truth is, people did call. A lot of people called. They didn't know what the smell was, but it was a rank smell that started happening as soon as Anthony got out of prison. Now, many people called the city, and the city basically blamed, conveniently enough, weirdly enough, creepily enough, Anthony's house was right next to a sausage making factory. Even though the sausage making factory had been there for years and the stench had started just when Anthony had moved back, the city basically came down a few times, didn't really do too much about it, but pointed the finger at the sausage factory without taking anyone's timeline about when this stench started to be like, okay, we're rolling you out because you've been here for years. At a lot of cost and expense to the business owners of the sausage factory, they had to get new equipment, they had to do a bunch of stuff, and the smell still didn't go away because it obviously wasn't coming from them. But people had reported a smell in the community, and because after, the sausage factory complied with getting what they needed to get, said by the city, they did that, nothing changed, so the city kind of dropped it, and the people in the community just learned to live with this rank smell. And I think, this is a really important place to kind of get into different things, we're going to get into race in this conversation, obviously, in a little bit. But this is a community that's low income and mostly black, okay? And let me tell you something. If you were in a wealthy white community and all of a sudden there was just a rank smell that you could smell for blocks radiating a whole area of a city, you best believe it would be handled and dealt with a swiftness. It's the fact that the city kind of never did any further investigation because clearly the smell was still there. Clearly the sausage place had been there for years and they never had this problem. And then all of a sudden they're having this rank issue, this smell. None of them know it's several decomposing bodies in the house next door, but they don't do their due diligence. They don't do their due diligence. They just live with the smell because that's what the city basically was like, we're not going to do anything more. We tried, they did it, it didn't work, and that's that. So again, another way this community was written off, and another way, these crimes were able to go on for a very, very long time undetected because people were just like, oh, this is a poor Black community, and clearly, it smells bad here. And they tried to call the city. They didn't do anything about it. So that's just what it is. And wrote this whole community off as a smelly just area in Cleveland when they were decomposing bodies, just ripe, decomposing for years next to this sausage factory. And they never thought to check, which is so weird to me. Really harping down on this point of this stench that was permeating throughout the community. It's like, okay, another thing is the cops were frequently in this area, particularly frequently at Anthony Sowell's house because he was a tier 3 sex offender. So every 90 days he had this, to get checked on by police, had his check-in or whatever, and they dropped in within those 90 days to make sure that he was doing well unannounced. And you're telling me cops don't know the smell of death? Homicide cops, any kind of cop doesn't know the stench of decomposition at all? Or doesn't smell something funny, or doesn't smell how intense the smell is when he opens the door to greet them, or smell how intense the smell is on his own property? Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of this weird thing where it's like, okay, this story is complex because it's not like, okay, it's a white guy in a Black community preying on Black women. It's a Black guy from this community who everyone was trying to toss as giving the benefit of the doubt, including the cops that would visit him regularly, when he was terrorizing this community and several Black women were going missing under the nose of the entire community because he was able to keep a shiny facade. But I just don't understand that if you're a cop, you would know what the stench of decomposition would be like. So again, you would know that, something was wrong, or you would smell the strength of the stench coming from Anthony's house because you'd have to go visit with him all the time, unannounced. So it just didn't make any sense to me. This is literally the second point where I'm just like, none of this makes sense. None of this is making sense. So after finding the third body, this completely changes the entire investigation. So on October 30th, 2009, the police department and homicide department decide to call the FBI to come in and help them and add reinforcements and use a cadaver dog to find out if there's any more bodies around the house. So they bring the cadaver dog in, and instantly the cadaver dog gets a scent that takes him straight back up into that room where they originally found the 2 dead bodies on the ground. And of course they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense why the cadaver dog would go up there, considering the fact that clearly the dog, the bodies had just been removed from that area less than 24 hours ago, so there could be remaining stench. But the dog literally stepped right over where the bodies were found and started sniffing and poking at a wall, an area of the wall that was badly patched up. So the police started breaking down that little area, and they found a crawl space where, surprise, surprise, they found another body. They find a black, huge plastic trash bag. Inside that black trash bag, they found a body, and then underneath the dirt of the crawl space, they found another body. So we're up to 5 bodies now. Okay? 5. Okay, they start collecting the bodies and all of that. They take the cadaver dog outside. The cadaver dog goes outside and instantly rushes towards a fresh pile of dirt near the entrance of the house. The stairs to the entrance of the house from the back. they start digging, and only 2 feet down they found another body in pretty bad shape in terms of decomp. And so at this point, we're at 6 bodies found within 2 days on one property. Okay, Anthony Sowell knows what's going on because of Debbie's story, and he's on the run. And if you notice, it's almost Halloween. So things are getting kind of intense around this time period because they're trying to make sure that they find him so that he's not on the streets when little kids are trick-or-treating, and they can figure out what's going on with having 6 dead, decomposing bodies of Black women on your property. And this one, the one found in the backyard, had a phone charger cable wrapped around her neck, and she was bound by cloth by her wrists. So he clearly has a thing about strangulation. So on October 30th, they end and call off the, searching for bodies at the house around 8 p.m. They hold another press conference to tell the people what they have found in the house. Three bodies, and they update the public, and they basically are saying, reiterating all the descriptions of Anthony, the fact that he's still on the loose, and the fact that they need to find him before Halloween, and that there's a $2,000 reward. Now, the next day, Halloween day, things ramp down with the search at his house just because they really need to focus on finding him, like I said before Halloween starts, because that will make it even more difficult to find him. And there's just going to be a bunch of kids and vulnerable people out on the streets late at night. So they needed to find him as soon as possible. So that's what they decided to focus on Halloween day. So during this whole period, the cops have been getting a ton of tips about, trying to, tips about where they think Anthony is based on his description. A lot of these tips led nowhere until a guy called and basically was like, yeah, a guy fitting that exact same description just walked past me on the street. I'm just calling to let you know. So the cops pull up in seconds and basically are able to find Anthony there, walk in, and they basically ask if he's Anthony Sowell, and he at first starts to deny it and is like, no, I'm not, you have the wrong guy. And then the police are like, okay, well, let us just take your prints to make sure and clear you to make sure you are the wrong guy. So then he's like, okay. So he goes with the cops in the cop car to the police station, and before they're able to take his prints, he basically is like, I did it. He admits to doing it. He admits to being Anthony Sowell, and the cops basically are like, okay, well, we found 6 bodies in your house, so are there any more? Is this the amount of bodies that you have at your house? And he basically was like, oh, I think so. And they were like, what about outside? And he was like, oh, those 2. So basically, they found these 6 bodies near or around the house, and there was still more in the yard. It wasn't just the last one they found. So obviously, he's in custody, and the efforts go back towards trying to find these other bodies on the property. So they basically put an APB out to the whole public and say, if you have a Black woman in your family who has been missing, please bring some form of DNA with you, and we will test it against the body so they could figure out how to identify who these bodies belong to because they were so severely decomposed. While this is going on, the homicide detectives discovered 4 more bodies in the backyard, and they discovered a human skull wrapped with newspaper in a bucket in the basement. So again, altogether, 11 dead bodies were found on this property. 11. And out of those 11 bodies, 8 were strangled. At least 8 were strangled or had evidence of strangulation. So The police department finally announced the identity of the first victim. Her name was Tanya Carmichael, and she personally and perfectly fit the description that the police and FBI had developed for Anthony's victims. These were women who were either struggling with alcohol or drug addictions, or were sex workers on the street, extremely impoverished and looking for a place to stay and or drugs. So Tanya Carmichael fit that description, and she was the first to be identified. So the FBI profile of who his victims were fit the description of the next two victims who were found, who were Talisha Fortson and Tashana Culver. They were both 32, and they were known to do drugs and to frequent the Mount Pleasant area where this was all going on. So over the next few weeks, and I'm going to read off all the victims' names that they were found, they were able to identify every body that came out of that house. So Nancy Cogg, Imelda Hunter, Crystal Dozier, Michelle Manson, Janice Webb, Kimmy Vet Smith, and Ishanda Young. Or LaShonda Long. Sorry, Ishanda. LaShonda Long. The 11th victim was named Diane Turner. Okay. So basically, through that process, they found 11 bodies. They were all women between the ages of 21 and 50. They were all black. They were all drug addicts or sex workers and frequented the Mount Pleasant area. And all of them, except for one, had open missing persons cases by their families. And they were found by chance, unfortunately, dead at the Sowell house. These women were mothers. Several of them were grandmothers. And it just makes you think about the fact that 11 women over the course of a couple years went missing in one area under the same description, being black women between their early 20s and their 50s and having severe addiction issues. They just up and disappeared, and no one noticed the pattern. No one looked more into it. No one, started talking to each other to see, oh, your family member's missing, mine is too. Your drug addict woman family member's missing, so is mine. She was last seen, or she told me she was going to Anthony's house, so is mine. None of this was put together because the pattern wasn't detected, because people weren't looking for a pattern, because these women are the very population of people that people just write off in this country. Remember what I was saying about LaTundra in the beginning, where she was talking about how she went to the police, got a rape kit right after she escaped the house, and told the police what was going on and expected them to call her immediately after, and never heard anything back. And the police's response to that was, oh, well, she's a drug addict, so it's hard to reach her. But they never followed up on this crazy story that happened to her that she told them already. It just didn't make sense. And so it's like, okay, how many other stories are similar to this now that you didn't take seriously or you didn't follow up on? It just doesn't make sense. And for these women to be black, to be impoverished, to be drug addicts, just vulnerable women in general, it's not surprising that it took years for people to connect the smell with Anthony Sowell, connect what's going on in that house with the missing women that were frequenting the area. All of this stuff is just so sad and disturbing. And these women were victims not only of Anthony, but terrible police work and biases by the different intersections in their lives. It's sad. The thing that really angers me is, let's piece it all together, okay? A tier 3 sex offender moves back to your neighborhood who spent the last 15 years in prison for sexual assault. Immediately, a strange stench starts coming into the neighborhood, enveloping and permeating the neighborhood, and 11 black women between their 20s and 50s go missing who are drug addicts in the area during a 2-year span right after he gets back. And the cops come and stop by this man's house unannounced several times over the course of 90 days because he's on probation, and no one thought something was out of place. No one thought he was strange. No one noticed that the smell was stronger on his property. No one noticed any of these things. And if they did notice it, no one did anything about it. It's sad. These women deserve justice, and thank God for LaTundra surviving, because that was almost about to be her. She was about to be the 12th body in this house. Thank God she did what she needed to do, go to the hospital right away, do that rape kit, do everything she needed to do in order to make sure that this man was going to get checked and what he did to women was going to be exposed. Thank God for her. Because there were other women too that survived him that weren't taking as seriously or were so freaked out by him that they couldn't continue with the investigation. So thank God for LaTundra, or else those 11 bodies would have just stayed in that house decomposing for God knows how long, and who knows how many women would have gone missing had he been able to have free reign. It's sad. The craziest part is there are several points in time where the police could have intervened in order to follow up on claims made about Anthony Sowell and the house on Imperial Avenue and the nefarious things that went under there before LaTundra and after LaTundra and during LaTundra. In fact, a woman in September of 2008, so a full year before LaTundra, had come to the police and basically said, her name was Vanessa, and she had said, yo, I was just raped and beaten at this house on Imperial Ave by this man. I need help, please. I'm trying to file charges. But the police basically were like, okay, if you want to file charges, you can. She got spooked because she had some charges of her own from her own checkered past from being addicted to drugs and sex work and things like that. So she kind of ran off and didn't commit to filing those charges against him. And the police never was like, oh, we're getting rumblings about this guy being a rapist or beating her or nearly killing her. No matter what she says about it, we should probably go check in on that. Oh, he just got out of prison for 15 years for doing a sexual assault. Oh, he's a tier 3 sexual assaulter, sex offender. Okay, let's go look into that. Instead, they just let it die as Vanessa was too scared to continue through with pressing charges because she had charges herself. So again, another example of the police being like, oh, well. Anyway, they had another chance 2 months later in December of 2008 when a woman named Gladys flagged down police officers on the street and told her that she was raped and almost murdered by Anthony Sowell. And they actually arrested him. She was willing to go to a trial. She was willing to press charges. She was willing to do all the things she needed to do to lock this man away. They actually arrested Anthony on the claims Gladys made. But then he told them that Gladys came into his house and tried to steal stuff from him. So because she was a drug addict, weaponized her situation against her, and the police believed him. So they let him go, and he didn't see any charges for what he did to Gladys either. Again, these two situations happened before LaTundra. It's crazy. Then, of course, we had LaTundra in September 2009 saying her case of being beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled almost to death and unconscious for hours in his home. Then we had another crazy case that was reported on October of 2009, right after LaTundra's case. A woman named Shawn Morris had gone to Anthony's house for a social thing. Essentially what happened was she was aggressively sexually assaulted and beaten and nearly killed, and in order to escape, she jumped out of his second-story window. She was unconscious, she was naked, and she essentially had cracked her skull, broken 8 ribs, had a brain aneurysm, and had suffered severe damage from that fall, but she survived. The paramedics were called, and when they showed up, they saw as Anthony Sowell was trying to pull Sean's dead body, not dead, but unconscious body back into his house. They caught him. And basically since she was unconscious, he was like, she fell out of the second story window while we were having wild sex. She's my wife. Right? So basically they're kind of like, okay. But the paramedics also noted that the house smelled like death. Again, big red flags with this guy. Anyway, so Sean goes to the hospital. In the hospital, she's unconscious for 3 days. As soon as she wakes up, she gets a call. The first call she gets is from Anthony Sowell, who basically says, if you tell or cooperate with the police, I'm going to murder you and I'm going to murder your entire family. So keep your mouth shut. So she wasn't able to then press charges because he had intimidated her. So again, but that's 4 women. That's 4 black women who were telling the police the same story. Different women, different ages, the same story within months of each other. And they were able to survive. All the women who were not able to survive were found in that house decomposed. They were able to escape. And still, nothing was done. They believed that this guy, what the guy said over what she said about being sexually assaulted, that other lady, Gladys, they believed that she was trying to rob him and let him go. He could have been arrested in 2008 and he wasn't. So it's just sick when you think about it. It's sick. But thank goodness Sean Morris survived her fall from the second story window, because when it came time to take Anthony Sowell down, she testified in his murder case along with LaTundra, and he was sentenced to, he was found guilty for 82 of the 83 charges pushed against him. His stepmother died long before she had any idea of what he had done, and the House of Horrors was demolished completely in 2011. Now, Anthony was sentenced to death, but he died of natural causes in February of 2021. So, yeah. That's the story of the Cleveland Strangler, you guys. It's sick, right? It's crazy. It's one of the craziest stories. But, yeah. It's kind of crazy. In conclusion, I just want to say a couple of things. Just because people live on the outskirts or the fringes of society, just because people are poor, just because people are women, just because people are sex workers, just because people are drug addicts, does not mean they don't deserve dignity and they don't deserve people to believe them. Okay, there were many instances where the police could have stepped in on this case and made sure that no other victims would be murdered by this man. They had him in custody in 2008 and let him go off of his word alone. Even though this is a man who has a history, who just got out of prison for doing 15 years for being a sexual assaulter. So you would think that they would favor on the side of the woman accusing him and not just be like, oh, clearly she robbed him, let's let him go. No, he has evidence. There's a record of evidence proving that he is known to have a history of sexual assault, and he was put on trial for that, and went to prison for 15 years for that. And the fact that they didn't believe Gladys goes to show that it doesn't matter. You could be, even if you're a woman, you're a drug addict, you're a sex worker, you're black, and your word means less than a man who was convicted of 15 years in prison for sexual assault and had just sexually assaulted you and tried to murder you, and a murderer of 11 plus women in the community. It's just sick. It's sick. And a few things. Like I said at the top, please watch How to Spot a Killer's episode on the Cleveland Strangler. We definitely came at it with different angles, but she did a really good job setting context for who he was in the life that he had before this happened. And please check out intellectuals, intellectual media's video on femicide, particularly Black femicide, that is on the rise in this country, because Black women at this point, 9 times out of 10, are more likely to be killed by Black men in this country. And though a lot of it is domestic violence related or intimate partner violence, this is something we have to address as a community. It's dangerous for Black women here, and there's a lot of social pressures on us to not call the police, to not rat out someone of our own, to not bring the police into situations of abuse or situations that might be potentially dangerous, because you don't want to be seen as a traitor to your race because you're bringing another Black man down. Okay, Latundra, Gladys, Sean, Morris, all of those women, Vanessa, were so strong to go to the police, even though the police let them down all of those times. They still went, and they still had their his name out there. So now people have to look at the police and say, you could have arrested him in 2008, in September, in December of 2008. You could have arrested him all of these times, and yet and still you didn't do it because you didn't believe these women, didn't value their opinion as much, even though they all did what they needed to do. That one woman who decided not to continue to press charges because he had threatened her and her family is a different story. And obviously Gladys's story, where she was scared because she had a checkered past. So she just didn't want all her business to come out on Front Street. So she just decided not to. And these are decisions as Black women that we have to make, because we are at an intersection and being pulled in all directions, and people refuse to see us as human beings worthy of being listened to, that have value in this world. And people refuse us to see us as both women and Black at the same time, including Black men. I really, really highly recommend that femicide video because it puts a lot of things in perspective. And when I hear people who are trying to be activists or social justice people in the community try and talk about what's going on in the Black community, and they never mention the epidemic of femicide in our culture, I know that they're full of shit. What else? Again, this is another case of the establishment failing these women, which is so disturbing and sad. This is another instance of that, and it just hurts my heart that so many women had to die in order for him to get caught, and he was able to die of natural causes, though it be in prison, but still is disturbing to me. There is a really wonderful Vice documentary, which I will also link down below, about this story. It's really well done. I don't love Vice, but they did a really good job talking about this story. And they talked to, I think it's Latundra, if I'm not mistaken, in that documentary. There's also a documentary called The Unseen on Amazon Prime, and it talks about this story as well. And that's where I first heard about it. So yeah, there are those resources. And I guess without further ado, I want to say Black Lives Matter and Free Palestine until it's backwards. I love you guys so much. Oh, and like and subscribe to my channel if you like this episode. Please check out my other videos. Hit that notification bell so you know when I post, and comment down below your thoughts and feelings about this episode. That being said, love you guys.